Welcome everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. Jenny, if you could just advance the slide once, and I'll just give everyone some webinar tips. So here at the Center for Responsive Schools, we just have some tips to share with you to have a successful webinar with us tonight. If you're having trouble with the picture, or you feel like there's a lag in the sound or the video, just feel free to, you can always exit the webinar and come back, or just close some other programs. If you're like me, you have like 150 tabs open. So I always make sure I close those down before webinar. We're going to use the Q&A feature tonight for questions for the panelists. So if you have questions about funding or anything that our host is covering tonight, use the Q&A feature, and Tina and Terrence will be monitoring that and collect all the questions that are being asked. And we'll have some time at the end for our hosts to answer them. Feel free to use the chat feature if you want to make some positive comments or connections to what it's being shared. And you can chat to just the hosts and panelists, or if you want to chat with everyone, you can do that too. And just as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you in a few days, and it'll be emailed to anyone who registered for this webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Tina to do some more introductions.
Good evening. Thanks everyone for being with us tonight. We appreciate your time, and we hope that you will find this to be helpful to you as you make some decisions moving forward to provide some services for your students. My name is Tina Mashburn, and I am the Chief of Special Projects at the Center for Responsive Schools. You just met Kristen, and also with us we have Terrence, who is the Terrence McAllister, Chief of Educational Partnerships, and you'll be hearing from him later. But the one you're here to listen to and to learn from is Dr. Jenny House. And Dr. Jenny House is the president of Red Rock Reports, and she is an education funding service company. She's a former teacher, a reading specialist, a school and district administrator. She's been a university instructor, an educational technology innovator. So she definitely has lots of experiences in the public sector as well as in the private sector. She has led some engineering, education, and marketing programs for Hewlett-Packard and Apple, and has held executive positions with multiple startups and other leading K-12 organizations. We are honored to have her with us tonight to share insights on funding options for SEL professional development and curriculum. So on behalf of the Center for Responsive Schools, please welcome Dr. Jenny House.
Thank you so much, Tina. I'm pleased to be with you all this evening if you're on the East Coast, and this afternoon if you're like me out here on the West Coast. So I'm going to talk about funding your SEL program. And the interesting thing is, this is changing on a daily basis. So some of the information I'm going to give to you, I got this morning. So it really is, it's going to be good for you in terms of finding funding for your different programs. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over the SEL market need, which is, as also, like I said, changing daily. The education funding, the stabilization fund, that's the 3 stimulus bills. I'm just going to give you a great source for finding out how much is still left, how much your school got, how much your district got, et cetera. And then I'm going to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act, and, which is the money that still keeps coming in, as well as the stimulus money and some other sources of money, including at the state level, and Q&A. And remember, this is your webinar. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Tina and Terrence will get those to me. And if there's clarification that you need as I'm going along, please indicate that, and they will let me know so I can jump in. Also, these slides will be in the recording. So, don't worry if you don't have time to write everything down. So the funding sources, When I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the federal funding, the state funding, local funding, and private funding. But the important thing to remember is that state and local, which is the biggest amount of money in terms of the school funding, 85% of that, and when I was in the district office, 85% of it went for personnel. And then that other 15% was pretty much already pre-committed, went for textbooks, consumables, et cetera. So really that discretionary spending is that federal funding. And normally, let's not, consider the stimulus money. Normally that's 8 to 10% of your budget. But as we know, things are a little bit different right now. And why do we need the SEL? And I know you all know this, but recently a report that was released, 70% of public schools report an increase in the number of students seeking mental health support. I think it's even going up, but that's a pretty high percentage. And only half of schools surveyed can provide it. What we worry about is, where are you going to get this help? Support is needed for the staff as well. So really, schools are struggling to meet the rising mental health needs. Anytime you see this, the color of that hot link, that is a hot link to the report. So if you need something for a presentation that you're doing or some business planning that you're doing, you can click on that for that information. So I'm going to talk about the status of SEL education, federal, the stimulus, the three funds, the CARES Act, the CRSSA, actually, I think it's CRSSA, and the American Rescue Plan, the ESSA funds, and I'm going to talk about the proposed 2023 budget increases because we're already looking at that budget as well as some state windfalls. So CARES Act, $13.75 billion for K through 12, still has some money left over, and I'll show you where you can find out how much. The stimulus 2 was $54 billion. Also, money is left over on that. And the biggest money left over is the American Rescue Plan, which was that $123 billion for K-12, as well as $3 billion more for special ed. Then, and what you also have to remember, and the reason we were asking about what kind of school you're from is if you are from the private schools, there's also a special amount of money for private schools in the stimulus 1 and 2, CARES and CRSSA, amounting to $4.4 billion. So, not only are you getting qualified for some of the money in the regular, but there is dedicated money for private schools in that. Also, the 2022 Every Student Succeeds Act budget is a 10% increase overall. And I'll go over specific parts of that are available to you for SEL. And then 2023, I won't tell you how much, but significant increases for that. And I'll go over that a little bit later. So how do you find out how much has already been spent in the stimulus money and what's left and where can I find out about my particular school? So there is a portal. When I say portal, see the hot link, with the word portal, you can click on that. And what you'll see is the funds awarded, dollars by state, the awarded, and the percent that's already been spent. And you can look at the ESSER funds, which is the elementary and secondary education, and then the GEAR funds and the HEAR funds, HEER, which is really higher ed. Which we aren't going to cover today, but ESSER is really the primary one. So you can click on your state And what it'll take you to is a state dashboard, which will show you how much is in the higher ed, the gear fund, and the secondary, the ESSER fund. It actually also shows you the IANS, which is that amount of money for the private schools. So you can look at that, and within your state, you'll see how much has already been spent in each of the areas. And it's really pretty enlightening. Now, caveat, when you look at it, don't go, celebrating in the halls, because sometimes the reporting lags, but it is a snapshot that gives you an idea of how much money is still left in that. Then you can, especially in the ESSER, you can click down to the district and it'll show you how much money is spent on that. The interesting thing where you see FY 2020 Title I allocations, the way that they decided how much money you get is based on your Title I enrollment. So if you're from a school with no Title I eligible students, that is not good in terms of money from the stimulus, because if you think of the federal government, its role is really to help students in need, the at-risk student population. So that's how they decided who gets the money. So, what you'll see is the school district and the ESSER total. Now, it doesn't have how much the school district has spent, but it does have for the state. So it's a good indication, of how much money is there. So great resource for you in that portal. As I said, the biggest amount of money that is still left is the American Rescue Plan. So think of it this way. The CARES Act and the second act, the 13.75 and then the 54 billion, that is really to replenish your coffers for what you had spent on COVID. Whether it was the protections, whether it was buying the technology for remote learning and all of the software, it's really to reimburse. Whereas the American Rescue Plan is really to plan for the future. So this is why a lot of districts haven't spent their money yet, because they're still in the process of planning and that how we are going to do education a little bit different going into the future. And based on what we learned during the pandemic, and a lot of it was the remote learning, what's it good for and what might we just do face to face? So that's what the American Rescue Plan is for, implementing strategies to meet, and they called this out. I pulled out the language itself, the social, emotional, and mental health, and the academic needs of the students that were hit hardest. So, definitely that's one of the biggest things. It's learning loss, which we now like to be more positive, learning recovery, and SEL is the biggest thing. So the ESSER funds, you can also look at the state allocation table. I've given you the hot link to that for the ESSER funds as well. Then I'm going to give you this hot link. And even though it's not a different color, the underlined words to the left, you can click on that. This is an interesting one. You may remember having to do the plan for how you're going to spend the American Rescue Plan money. Now, the way the federal government distributed it, they gave 2/3 of the money to the states right off. But the final third, and remember, this is $122 billion, so that's a lot of money. So the final third, the states had to put in a plan of how they were going to use that. And then the districts were to put in a plan. So if you look at it, you can look at how much your state got, then what the state plan is, and then what the LEA or district plans are as well on the websites for the states. So this is a great one to really look at the state plan, because if you're in the district, it's a roll up that you're helping the state, proof that plan and how you are doing it as well. And, that big amount of money, that's, how you're going to be spending that, right? So the LEA plan is really interesting. If you look at that bright blue, 28% of that is for academic recovery, but the yellow is for the SEL. So you could say that even the pink is because sometimes it's the technology to run if you're using a plan, using a software piece for SEL. It may be the technology that you needed to buy for that. But you can see what the LEAs are saying they are using the money. And this is a survey of 3,000 different districts, 60% of all the students in the country. Here's another one that's interesting, that really summer school, we've always, been implementing summer school, but this year it's even more important to address the learning loss. And as I said, learning recovery, but it's also very important for SEL. And the summer school is really getting the students feeling better about themselves, more confident about their learning, more confident about who they are as people, and all of the different aspects of SEL being spent, being addressed during the summer school. So this is a really important one. Also, that it can be used after school as we resume school in the fall. So that was an interesting one as well. The source again is from Future Ed. And on the left, if you want more information about that or more information about your state and the amount of money, you can click on that. So the timing of the stimulus acts, we've got this great amount of money, but when does it go away? Well, technically you can see where it started, and then, technically it ends September 30th for each of them. And why September 30th? Well, your school budget year is from July 1 through June 30th, but the federal budget is October 1 through September 30th. And since this is a big federal program, that's when it ends. So technically the CARES Act ends September 30th, 2022. We know that there's going to be carryover of that, into the, after that. But technically it should end. And then the second one, the CRSSA, that ends 2023, September 30th. And the big one, the American Rescue Plan, is September 30th, 2024. So, in the plan, you're looking at what are we spending on 2022, 2023, 2024 school year. So that's the big one. So funds should be obligated. Now, what does that mean? So obligated means that you've already committed to something that you're going to be, implementing in that 24-25 school year, but you can't pay for it until it's actually delivered. A prime example of this is professional development. Okay. You can commit to it, means you obligate by 9:30, but you can't pay for it until it's actually delivered during that school year. So important that you remember the funds must be obligated by 9:30, 2024. So here's, the latest news of how the Department of Education is interpreting this, that they can seek more than a year's worth of time, up to 14 months to finish spending. Okay. Remember, it's obligated, but you have up to 14 months after September 30th, 2024 to finish spending it. The professional development is a big one. That also, there's some schools that there's construction, like putting in new air filters in their schools, or, things that if there's, any COVID again, or COVID-like sicknesses that hit the schools, that there is this safe and healthy construction that's been done. So a lot of that, will be finished spending. Okay. So ESSER funds on contracts for mental health. Okay. So it could be contractors, it could be professional development, it could be materials, instruction that's being delivered, that can be paid for during that time. Again, I have given you the hot link that if you want more clarification on that, you have that. Okay, the Every Student Succeeds Act. Remember, this is like the little engine that could. This just keeps coming, even though we've got the Stimulus Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act, Title I, Title II, et cetera, that's still going on every single year. If you want to see how much for each of the programs or your state, you can click on those, see where that hot link, and you can look at by program and download it as an Excel spreadsheet or tables by state. I live by those, because the Department of Education is updating them at all times, and it's really like every 6 weeks to 2 months, they update that. So what specific Every Student Succeeds Act funding can be used for SEL? Definitely Title I, that's a quick 16.5 billion. And remember, in Title I, there's also migrant ed, neglected and delinquent ed. So all of those can be used. Supporting effective instruction, that's actually Title II. And that is your professional development, and that's going to be really important for all of you. I was talking to a school in Milwaukee this morning. 10 teachers are taking early retirement because they're pretty burnt out. So there's going to be a lot of new teachers coming in, as well as refresher for existing teachers. So 2.1 billion. Impact aid, remember, that's for all of your schools on federal lands. That's to supplant the taxes, because on federal lands, they don't pay taxes. So that's to supplant that. ELA, definitely for your students or your immigrants. And that could be even immigrants from the Ukraine. That Title III money can be used for that. IDEA, that's your special ed, 15.5 billion. Title IV-A, Part A, remember, that's safe and healthy. 20% of that can be used for safe and healthy schools. So, it's called out specifically. Also, remember I said after school programs, your 21st century community learning centers can use that money. REAP, that's your rural education assistance programs. And those are for, like I came from California, I'm now in Oregon, but in California, we had over 1,000 one-school districts. Well, that, each one of them can't afford much because their budgets are so small. So this is additional money that they can use for any Every Student Succeeds Act. They can put it all in Title I, or they can put it all in Title II, etc. So that's a big one. Homeless, and we all know this is a huge problem across the country. That definitely can be used for SEL programs, and even career and technical education funds. As you're preparing students for careers and college, that money can also be used because you want students that are healthy, both mentally and academically. So here's the interesting one. The proposed budget for 2023 is significant new money, especially for SEL and academic needs, especially for students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. So what are the highlights? Look at this one, a $20 billion increase for Title I. Now remember, this is 23-24 school year. 36.5 billion. This is a proposal for Congress, but if you think about it, this is also as everything is winding down for the stimulus funds. So this is to really make sure that these populations are still served. A $2.6 billion increase for special ed, and $1 billion to double the number of school counselors. Obviously, that's SEL as well, and mental health professionals in K-12 schools. And that's whether, it's synchronous on, like we are doing right now, or, people that are actually working in the schools. Also, 1.1 billion for EL programs, and 1.6 billion to train teachers in special areas. And that you can, and it's really up to the district to decide what those special areas are. But if you have teachers that have no idea, how to really help in SEL, this is a great fund of money for that. And also 30 million to train school leaders. We also know that there's going to be a huge turnover in principals and district office personnel. So money for training them as well. So these are highlights. But remember, Congress has not approved that budget yet. They have a few other things that they are addressing right now. Happening right now. This came out this morning, okay? Bipartisan legislation in Congress intended to address school shootings. Now, not all of you are dealing with that. 1 billion in funds for mental health programs in schools. So it's not just the schools that have had the shootings. It's really to provide mental health for all students to, so we don't have the school shootings, right? An additional $1 billion to support safe and healthy students, and summer and after school programming for middle and high school students. Because as we know, unfortunately, that's where we've seen the biggest amount until Uvalde, so this is a really important one. And the article that came out in is Chalkbeat, and I've given you the hot link to that one. State funds. This is just I won't go over it. It's really what's the spending per student. But Oklahoma, here's some examples of SEL movement in the states. Oklahoma is hiring 300 counselors to help with mental health. Again, 35 million is to come from the American Rescue Plan, but the big thing that the legislature is dealing with, how do we continue this once the ARP funds are gone? And where are we going to find personnel? California is really doing more, and we're seeing this I'm tracking legislation across the country. The rise of the community schools. It's really, if you think of it takes a village, money in California. So the governor has appropriated $3 billion for multi-year transition to community schools. That means really looking at the parents, at the schools, at the communities, working as a village to support the students, comprehensively meeting student needs, engaging the families as partners, empowering teachers, a web of relationships, and contracting with outside health and social service agencies. But it's really more different types of companies that are providing SEL services as well as local. So this is something to watch, because as I'm watching the legislation of more states doing this, they are putting state money behind this, not just depending on ARP. Vermont, a multi-year grant to establish community schools across the state. Alignment and integration of social and emotional behaviors initiatives at the state level. These are 5-year grants. Some of them are already in process, and I've given you the hot link to those. NCSL is the National Council for the database for state legislature database of K-12 mental health legislation. And that is also addressing SEL. So if you just want to get in and look at the types of mental health legislation in your state, you can click on that and see what's available. Here's some additional funding resources. One is the Title I amounts available by district, and that's the Every Student Succeeds Act Title I amounts. So you can click on it, and what you'll see is the states. Then you click on the states, and it has, each state has a spreadsheet that you can download, and it has every district and how much Title I money is available to that district. You will note that it'll give you 2020 funds. They did not change that in 2021. So a lot of times these are done for 2 years. So we're expecting that there will be a change in the fall to these Title I amounts. But for right now, it's the 2020 levels. Also, remember when I talked about the rural education assistance programs? They have eligibility of different rural districts. So you can, if you're a rural district, you can click on that and look at your eligibility for additional funds other than what you already get from the Every Student Succeeds Act. Then there's federal grants, many different kinds of federal grants, and it's education, it's justice, it's labor, it's agriculture. I came from a district in California that had a high amount of migrant workers for agriculture. So we not only got money from education, but we also got a great deal of money from agriculture. So never think that it's just, education money coming from the federal government. So you can look at those. Also, smaller grants, classroom school grants. Get Ed Funding is a great site to go to, and sometimes it's money for your class project for SEL, sometimes it's the school level, and there are some for district level as, available. Because remember I said at the very beginning, this landscape is changing on a daily basis. I really, really mean that. It's just like California coming out with that $3 billion. That just happened this month. So, keep checking your state to see, your state education site. There is money that's going to be coming out, to match the federal money. And the legislatures, they know that the coffers are full right now with the American Rescue Plan and the other two funds from the stimulus. But you got to remember, the legislatures are already looking at how can we segue from that big trough of money to, a more normal amount of money and not lose all of our programs. So they're already looking at that, and how the states can start to supplement that. We're having a little blip right now with, the stock market, things like that, that indicators that, there may be a little dip in funding, state funding, but so keep checking your state funding. So Terrence and Tina, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions that may have come up that people may have.
So Dr. House, the one that we have at this time is, does the 1.6 billion to train teachers in special areas include trauma-informed teaching practices and or programs?
Yes, it does. And of course, if you think of a place like Parkland or Uvalde or Connecticut, all of a sudden I can't remember the district, but yes, the trauma, informed there, and there are there have been over 264 schools that have had, school shootings this year. So, the trauma around those, definitely it will fund those. But it's also, that's why I said this is, a local decision as to how that money can be used.
And that was the only question that we had in the Q&A. Tina and I were able to answer the remaining questions.
That sounds great. And what I've also done is I have given you my email address, phone number. If there's something that comes up that you need, something immediately, say you're going to your school board or, something has come up that you have a question about, don't hesitate to contact me or Terrence or Tina or, anybody at the Center for Responsive Schools. They'll get to me as well. So, the money, it's always an interesting thing to watch it, because it definitely is a changing environment. But, the good news is social and emotional learning is a very important area. The mental health of students and the teachers. Please don't forget the teachers. And I've been a principal and as has Tina and Terrence, and we were all saying, boy, this is a rough time to be a principal in the schools these days. So, the support for all levels is really, really important. And there is the money to help. So hopefully that'll help you as you're launching into your summer programs or as you're coming back to school.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And before Terrence closes it out, I just want to make sure everyone knows that we'll share the slides in the follow-up email. So you'll have access to all those links. And I'm going to drop in the chat a funding resource for leaders that will help guide school leaders for funding for Fly 5, which is the social emotional learning curriculum that we have here at Center for Responsive Schools. So I'll turn it over to Terrence to finish it up.
That's a great segue, Kristen. You mentioned Fly 5. So before I share the email address that you all can contact us by, I would also like to mention that the Center for Responsible Schools, not only do we have Fly 5, which is our social emotional learning curriculum, which is teaching students skills that they can use now and carry with them throughout their lives, and is based on the CASEL competencies and is aligned to the CASEL competencies. We also have responsive classrooms, which is professional development, which allows for teachers, administrators to set the environment for the classroom for academia to take place. So we wanted to mention those two particular items that the Center for Responsible Schools, our organization, provides not only for schools, but also for school districts. And so before we close, I'd like to thank Dr. House for sharing her wealth of knowledge with us. I learned something in addition to what I did know about this topic by listening to this webinar. So again, we'd like to take this time to thank you all for being with us tonight and connecting with us. If you would like to have additional information regarding information about funding, or if you would like to know more information about Responsive Classrooms, which is our professional development platform, as well as Fly 5, which is our social emotional learning curriculum, you can contact us through the educational partnership at crslearn.org. Again, we thank you for your time and for connecting with us tonight, and we look forward to possibly hearing from you in the future. We hope everyone has a good evening.